Russian refineries keep burning. In recent weeks, Ukraine's strike checklist has grown by another 6 targets, with drones reaching as far as beyond the Urals. Refineries, terminals, and factories are in flames. With air defenses faltering, Moscow's best defense has once again become offense. Ukraine is plunging back into darkness, as Russian missiles have knocked out an estimated 60% of its gas generation capacity. And winter is just around the corner. In these grim circumstances, Kyiv's hopes rest not only on the sight of burning refineries, but also on a surprising shift in Donald Trump's tone. The US president has reportedly given a green light for sharing intelligence with Ukraine, and is now considering the sale of Tomahawk cruise missiles. What is the current state of the war? Let's find out. Welcome to the 20s Report. The GTBT project was born in a time of rapid global change, and the war in Ukraine has only accelerated those shifts. In moments like these, I value long-term partners even more. One of them is XTB, our long-standing partner, and the investment app I personally use every day. It is where I have managed my own investments for years, and I can genuinely recommend it. XTB is a Warsaw-based fintech company with a global reach, offering access to thousands of stocks and ETFs, commission-free, up to 100,000 euros in monthly turnover. Thanks to it, I can keep track of industries that are gaining traction, from defense and energy to technology and AI. Often these are the same industries we cover in our episodes. By using the link in the description, you support this channel. And remember, investing always involves risk. Since our last update on September 30th, the map of Russia's damaged refining sites has evolved. On October 1st, a massive fire engulfed the Yaroslav refinery, the largest in northern Russia. 2 days later, Ukrainian drones, likely Lyuty models, struck the Orenburg region, hitting the Orks Nefteorgsyntes refinery. On October 4th, the Kirishi complex near St. Petersburg was attacked again, followed by a blaze at Łukoil's giant refinery in Kstovo on October 5th. Perhaps the most remarkable strike came against the Antipinsky refinery, located beyond the Ural Mountains in western Siberia, nearly 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine's border. The final October hit targeted again the Bazhneft refinery in Bashkortostan. Since the start of Ukraine's long-range drone campaign in January 2024, Ukrainian forces have successfully hit 29 of Russia's 39 refineries, about 74% of the total. 40 of those strikes occurred since August alone, accounting for more than 30% of all attacks over the past 21 months, a clear sign of escalation. The campaign has also expanded to supporting infrastructure. 2 strikes on oil terminals in Crimea's Feodosia, another in Kurgan, and a hit on the Korobkovsky gas facility near Volgograd. Not all targets have been fuel-related. Recent attacks have also set ablaze an electronics factory in Novosibirsk, the Sverdlov munitions plant, and facilities in Belgorod. And so Ukraine's campaign of deep strikes show no sign of slowing. Russia, struggling to adapt, has resorted to improvised defenses, including the installation of metal nets and scaffolding over key facilities, like this example from Samara. Precise estimates of how much refining capacity have been taken offline are impossible, but the numbers keep climbing. After the first wave of attacks, Reuters estimated 15% of Russia's refining capacity had been disrupted. Later assessments raised that figure to 20-25%, and by late September, Russia's Syala agency reported that 38% of the country's refining capacity was idle, with 70% of the outages caused by drone strikes. Given the 6 additional hits in October, it is likely that threshold has now passed 40%. Looking at Russia's regional fuel outages map, there are now only a handful of areas that have not reported shortages. Internal cracks are visible everywhere, not just in the growing flood of videos showing angry drivers frustrated by price hikes, no gasoline or poor fuel quality. In September, rail shipments of crude oil fell to their lowest level since the pandemic. The problem runs deeper than refining. As the Wall Street Journal reports, refinery attacks are hitting the backbone of Russia's logistics, governance and roughly 40% of its export revenues. The remaining 60% still comes from crude oil, yet sanctions and the gradual depletion of oil fields paint an increasingly bleak picture for that pillar as well. The share of Russia's hard-to-extract oil reserves is projected to rise from 59% today to 80% by 2030, according to the Russian Energy Ministry itself. The golden era of Russia's giant conventional oil fields is in the past, said Daria Melnik, vice president for upstream research at Rystad Energy. It is essentially a long, slow farewell to Russian oil, added Matthew Sagers, Russia expert at S&P Global. On the battlefield, the picture looks also relatively positive. Ukraine's Deep State project estimates that Russian territorial gains in September fell by 44% compared to August, the lowest level since May. But that hardly means the situation is improving. An investigation by Ukraińska Prawda once again points to a long list of problems plaguing the Ukrainian armed forces, above all a chronic shortage of infantry. Due to undermanned positions, gaps between Ukrainian strongpoints stretch from 200 to 700 meters, and in some cases even a full kilometer. Vulnerabilities that Russian forces exploit with precision. There is no clear line of contact. Russian units sometimes advance 10 to 15 kilometers deep, reaching Ukrainian artillery positions. The same report notes that due to the sheer volume of Russian glide bombs, CABs, drones and airstrikes, Ukrainian logistics hubs have been forced to pull back 40 to 50 kilometers behind the front. That retreat has lengthened supply lines and reduced the army's flexibility. The paper also criticizes Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky for what it calls micromanagement of frontline operations, particularly in the Dobropilya sector, and a lack of trust in brigade and battalion leaders. Despite recent defensive successes, repelling Russian forces near Dobropilya and holding Pokrovsk, the overall situation remains extremely difficult. That view is shared by Ukrainian analyst Tatarigami from Frontelligence, who notes that while Russian desertion rates are climbing, they still remain lower than Ukraine's. Meanwhile, staggering Russian casualty numbers continue to surface. The Hohuzhit project recently published what it claims are internal Russian figures for the past 8 months. 10,843 soldiers killed per month, with a total of 281,000 killed and wounded during that period. User Konstantin calculated that for every 100 acres, about 40 hectares of captured ground, the Kremlin pays the price of $7.3 million, 11 dead, 19 wounded and 4 missing. As Tatarigami sums it up, Russia's position has clearly deteriorated. Their gains in 2025 are very poor relatively to the cost. Morale is probably close to its lowest point, recruitment is faltering. But even so, the Kremlin continues to find ways to replenish its forces, at least for now. In short, Ukraine's recent successes are no reason for complacency. Viewed from above, some trends are clearly shifting. But perceptions on the ground in Ukraine can look very different. Russian strikes, while less splashy in Western media than Ukraine's strikes inside Russia, are still taking a heavy toll. As every winter approaches, the Kremlin's aim remains the same: to degrade Ukraine's power and heat infrastructure so that the cold months become unbearably harsh for civilians. Waves of hundreds of drones and guided missiles regularly hammer the country. DTEK, Ukraine's largest private energy firm, said Friday's Russian strike was its third hit in a single week. Quote, "Since February 2022, our thermal plants have been attacked more than 200 times," the company said. The Financial Times reports that Russia has destroyed as much as 60% of Ukraine's gas production capacity ahead of winter. The target is not the army so much as public morale. To survive the coming months, Ukraine will almost certainly need help from the West. Blackouts have already begun in Kyiv. Just back from Kyiv after Washington, the mood has turned darker. Even before last night's strikes, the word winter is back, not just in forecasts, but in tone. Energy, money, morale. Everything now bends toward one goal: survival. Journalist Balázs Jarabik wrote on X. In theory, the quickest way to blunt the air campaign would be to destroy the Shahed production plant in Tatarstan. The factory can reportedly churn out some 2,700 drones per month, making it arguably more strategically important than any single refinery, and much harder to put out of action. Ukraine struck the site successfully in April last year, but Russia quickly restored production. Put bluntly, cheap light drones won't cripple that factory, and many are shot down by dense air defense. Kyiv therefore needs a weapon with a large warhead and high survivability against interceptors. Until recently, there was no candidate with the required 1,000-kilometer plus reach. Several have now emerged. On October 6, Donald Trump said that he had, quote, sort of made a decision on supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, the most lethal cruise missiles in the American inventory, with roughly 2,500-kilometer range, capable of reaching virtually all key targets in Russia. He later watered the statement down, saying he wanted to discuss it with Putin. Zelensky has insisted any Tomahawk strikes would be directed only at Russian military targets. Even if Tomahawks are approved, major constraints remain. Reuters reports that US stocks of Tomahawks are limited and much of the inventory is already assigned to the US Navy and other US operations. Training crews to operate the system takes time, some argue up to a year, and Ukraine would need compatible launch platforms, since Tomahawks are mainly fired from ships. This complicates matters, which is why some observers argue that the JASSM-ER would be the better option for Kyiv. Carried under F-16s, JASSM-ER stocks are larger than Tomahawks, but its range is significantly shorter, about 1,000 kilometers. Others are banking on a homegrown candidate from the Dnieper Valley, the FP-5 Flamingo, a Tomahawk-like cruise missile made in Ukraine. Firepoint, the manufacturer, recently boasted of a production capacity of roughly 200 missiles already in October, a claim that immediately raised eyebrows. Aside from a few short videos, hard evidence of operational FP-5 strikes remains scarce. Remember that the FP-5 is claimed to have an extraordinary range of up to 3,000 kilometers and a warhead exceeding 1 ton, roughly twice the payload of a Tomahawk or a JASSM. In an interview with ZNUA, one of the missile's designers said that project briefly drew inspiration from the Soviet Tu-141 drone, but then abandoned the path, claiming instead to have, quote, developed the world's best missile in terms of range and warhead mass. The designer said the rocket is powered by an AI-25 engine with, quote, a limited but sufficient service life. Asked about production scale, he insisted the capacity isn't the problem. Quote, why they aren't used more widely is not for us to answer. We are the manufacturer, not the end user. We currently produce 2 to 3 missiles per day at the moment, and plan to ramp up to full production as scheduled. Unquote. Note that Firepoint already makes one of Ukraine's most ubiquitous long-range drones, the FP-1. As for evidence, Russians claim they have already shot down a Flamingo. According to Russian mill bloggers, the wreck's nameplate reportedly showed it was Unit Number 7, and they argued the missile was, quote, easy to shoot down because of its slow flight, at roughly 600 km per hour. That may explain part of the rationale for Tomahawks. FP-5 production is only just ramping up, which is why visual evidence of its use is limited. And if those reported speed and radar signature figures hold up, FP-5 would be a more primitive system than JASSM or Tomahawk, both of which fly roughly 50% faster and present a smaller radar signature. Still, even if a salvo of 10 such missiles is fired, getting 1 or 2 through can be enough to annihilate critical enemy infrastructure. So it is no surprise Kyiv wants to expand its missile options, although reaching a level of routine, sustained use of such lethal weapons will take time. Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukraine has already used Flamingo and the longer-range Neptune tandem successfully in early October, reportedly striking an FSB command site on Crimea. German paper Die Welt reported that 2 missiles hit the target and the third fell about 100 meters away. The blasts left craters up to 15 meters across. Returning to Donald Trump's recent shift toward a surprisingly pro-Ukrainian stance, 2 new elements stand out. Alongside talk of Tomahawks deliveries, the Financial Times reports that Washington has for weeks been providing Kyiv with intelligence data, effectively guiding Ukraine's deep strike campaign with US reconnaissance. Make them feel the pain, Trump reportedly said, frustrated by the earlier strategy of appeasing Putin. Contacts between the 2 capitals have intensified. The leaders sometimes speak even daily, and Zelensky is due back in the White House this Friday. It is worth remembering that this dependency cuts both ways. Chinese reconnaissance satellites are believed to be helping Russia guide its own missile strikes on Ukraine. On October 5th, 3 Chinese satellites passed over the Lviv region 9 times. The same day, heavy bombardments hit the city. Trump's motivation may not stem solely from disillusionment with Putin. The reason could be far more domestic. According to a new Harvard-Harris poll, 71% of Democratic voters and 86% of Republicans support tougher sanctions on Russia. When asked whether the US should continue arms deliveries to Ukraine and impose more sanctions if Moscow prolongs the war, 3/4 of respondents from both parties said yes. The consensus is clear. Once again, the old rule holds. If you want to understand foreign policy, look at domestic politics. And so the reality of war shapes an infinitely complex process, impacted by millions of micro variables, from a tactical skirmish at the front line to the destruction of a single fuel depot, or passing remark from a political leader. Everything connects, which makes it so difficult to gauge the true balance of power. Politicians, analysts, and ordinary people do this all the time, but each of them applies a different set of weights to different phenomena. One way to distill a coherent picture is to average out the assessments of professionals, and after months of chill, even as winter nears, one can sense a subtle thaw. Since time may no longer be on Russia's side, it is challenging Western resolve in more risky and aggressive ways, writes Nigel Gould Davis for the IISS. Military analyst Rob Lee concurs, quote, "I agree. I think Russia is approaching an inflection point in the coming months about whether to continue the war. In order to capture all of the Donetsk region, which is of questionable actual strategic value for Russia, Moscow may need to conduct another mobilization or otherwise change its current approach, which has not achieved a breakthrough despite Ukrainian manpower issues." Unquote. There is also renewed debate over whether Russia's hybrid attacks on NATO states are themselves a symptom of mounting internal strain, a theory explored in our previous report. A strategic, warmer wind is indeed blowing toward Kyiv. What good is that to us? Ukrainians might reply, if we are still freezing and dying. They continue to bear the overwhelming share of this war's cost, one that stretches far beyond national boundaries. There is no easy answer to this paradox, and the war grinds on.